June 4, 1942, 80 miles northwest of Midway Atoll. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly beneath a canvas of broken clouds, its surface deceptively calm in the early morning light. 30 feet below, the USS Nautilus moved through the blue-black depths like a steel predator, her hull creaking softly under the pressure. The metallic breathing of her ballast valves echoed through the cramped corridors, a mechanical rhythm that had become the heartbeat of 105 men sealed within her iron belly. Lieutenant Commander William H. Brockman, Jr. pressed his eye to the periscope, scanning the horizon with methodical precision. The view revealed nothing but endless blue, punctuated by distant columns of smoke rising like funeral pyres into the morning sky. Above them, the battle for the Pacific had already begun. Fighter planes screamed through the air, their engines roaring with the fury of nations at war. Bombs exploded like thunder, sending shockwaves through the water that rattled the submarine's hull. Yet here, in the silent depths, Brockman and his crew remained invisible witnesses to history in the making. They did not yet know that within hours, their obsolete vessel would alter the course of the most decisive naval battle of World War II. The USS Nautilus was an anachronism by 1942 standards. Built in 1930, she belonged to the Narwhal class, a generation of submarines that many considered relics before the war had even begun. Her 100-meter-length housed machinery that seemed ancient compared to the sleek new fleet boats rolling off American assembly lines. At 2,770 tons displacement, she was larger than most submarines, but slower than nearly all of them. Her maximum surface speed of 17 knots made her a sitting duck for enemy destroyers, while her submerged speed of 8 knots meant she could barely keep pace with a postal ship. The Japanese Naval Command held American submarines in particular contempt during the early months of the Pacific War. They called them Kame no Sensuikan, turtle submarines, slow, predictable, and harmless. Japanese destroyer captains had developed tactics specifically designed to hunt these underwater tortoises, using depth charges and sonar with methodical efficiency. In their eyes, American submariners were merely target practice, floating coffins manned by sailors, too cowardly to fight on the surface. Even within the United States Navy, submarines occupied an ambiguous position in 1942. The old guard of battleship admirals viewed them as auxiliary vessels, useful perhaps for reconnaissance, but irrelevant to the grand clash of fleet actions. The prevailing doctrine held that decisive naval battles would be won by aircraft carriers and their air groups, with submarines relegated to harassment and supply interdiction. The idea that an aging boat like the Nautilus could influence a major carrier engagement seemed absurd to most strategic planners in Washington. But William Brockman possessed a different vision of submarine warfare. An engineering officer by training, he understood that the true value of his vessel lay not in her torpedo tubes, but in her ability to see without being seen. While other submarine commanders focused on sinking tonnage, Brockman believed his primary mission was intelligence gathering. His meticulous reports had already proven invaluable to Pacific Fleet headquarters, providing detailed assessments of Japanese ship movements and tactical patterns. The Nautilus carried 24 Mark 14 torpedoes, weapons that had become notorious among submarine crews for their unreliability. More than half would fail to explode upon impact, their magnetic detonators proving woefully inadequate against enemy hulls. The submarine's sonar equipment was primitive by later standards, relying on passive hydrophones that required absolute silence from the crew to function effectively. Her periscope optics, while adequate for surface observation, offered limited range and clarity compared to the sophisticated equipment that would emerge later in the war. Inside the submarine, conditions bordered on medieval. The interior temperature regularly exceeded 90 degrees Fahrenheit, with humidity levels that made breathing feel like drowning in slow motion. No air conditioning existed aboard naval vessels of this vintage, leaving the crew to endure the suffocating heat generated by diesel engines and electrical equipment. The air recycling systems pumped stale oxygen through compartments that reeked of diesel fuel, human sweat, and the metallic tang of machinery operating under extreme stress. The crew quarters consisted of narrow bunks stacked 3 high, each barely wide enough to accommodate a man lying on his side. Privacy was non-existent. Personal space measured in inches rather than feet. The galley could feed only a fraction of the crew at any given time, forcing sailors to eat in shifts while standing in corridors designed for storage rather than dining. Sanitation facilities were primitive and constantly malfunctioning, creating hygiene problems that would have closed any civilian facility within hours. Yet these men had volunteered for submarine duty, drawn by higher pay, faster promotions, and the peculiar brotherhood that develops among sailors who share such intimate hardships. They came from small towns across America, bringing skills learned in automobile factories, steel mills, and electrical plants. Many had never seen the ocean before enlisting, yet they had adapted to life underwater with remarkable resilience. Their technical expertise with machinery would prove crucial in the hours ahead. At 0755 hours, Brockman detected smoke columns on the northern horizon. His periscope swept methodically across the bearing, revealing the unmistakable silhouettes of Japanese warships. The enemy fleet appeared massive through his limited field of view. Multiple aircraft carriers escorted by heavy cruisers and destroyers. This was Admiral Nagumo's striking force, the same formation that had devastated Pearl Harbor 6 months earlier. Now it was returning to finish what it had started, aiming to destroy the remnants of American naval power in the Pacific. Brockman ordered battle stations. Throughout the submarine, sailors rushed to their assigned positions with practiced efficiency. The torpedo rooms buzzed with activity as crews prepared their weapons for firing. In the control room, plotting boards were updated with target bearings and estimated ranges. The submarine's executive officer, Lieutenant Roy Benson, coordinated damage control preparations while tracking the enemy formation's movement pattern. Every man aboard understood that they were about to engage the most powerful naval force on Earth with weapons that might not function properly. The approach proved challenging from the beginning. The Nautilus needed to close within torpedo range while avoiding detection by enemy destroyers screening the carrier formation. Brockman maneuvered his boat with surgical precision, using small course corrections to maintain stealth while positioning for an optimal firing solution. The submarine's ancient sonar equipment provided minimal tactical information, forcing the crew to rely primarily on periscope observations and dead reckoning navigation. At 0820 hours, Brockman achieved firing position. The aircraft carrier Kaga filled his periscope lens, her flight deck crowded with planes preparing for launch. The target appeared almost impossibly large, a floating city of steel and aviation fuel moving at 25 knots through calm seas. Brockman calculated firing angles with mechanical precision, adjusting for target speed, range, and the submarine's own movement through the water. The torpedo solution required mathematical calculations, performed under extreme pressure with equipment that predated electronic computers by decades. The first torpedo launched at 0825 hours, followed by 2 more at 15-second intervals. Each weapon carried a warhead containing 643 pounds of TNT, theoretically sufficient to cripple or sink any warship afloat. The torpedoes ran straight and normal, their wakes barely visible from the submarine's depth. Brockman watched through his periscope as the weapons approached their target, counting seconds until impact. The crew held their breath, waiting for the explosions that would announce their success. Nothing happened. All 3 torpedoes struck the cargo's hull and failed to detonate. The Mark XIV's magnetic detonator system, designed to trigger explosions beneath enemy ships, proved completely ineffective against Japanese hull construction. Years of peacetime testing had failed to reveal fundamental flaws in the weapon's design, leaving American submarine crews to discover these deficiencies during actual combat operations. The psychological impact on the Nautilus crew was devastating. They had achieved perfect firing conditions only to watch their weapons bounce harmlessly off the enemy. Japanese lookouts spotted the torpedo wakes immediately. Destroyers swung toward the submarine's position with deadly intent, their sonar systems already tracking the underwater intruder. The Kaga herself began evasive maneuvers, turning hard to port while increasing speed to maximum revolutions. Within minutes, the entire enemy formation knew that an American submarine lurked somewhere beneath the waves, and they responded with overwhelming force. The first depth charges detonated at 0835 hours. 8 Japanese destroyers had surrounded the Nautilus's estimated position, dropping patterns of depth charges in coordinated attacks designed to crush any submarine foolish enough to remain in the area. Each explosion generated tremendous underwater pressure waves that struck the submarine's hull like sledgehammer blows. Light bulbs shattered throughout the boat. Instruments vibrated off their mountings. The steel hull itself groaned and twisted under forces that exceeded its original design specifications. Brockman ordered emergency deep, taking the submarine down to 180 feet in an attempt to escape the barrage. The Nautilus descended through layers of water that grew progressively darker and more compressed, her hull creaking ominously as external pressure increased. Emergency lighting cast eerie red shadows through compartments filled with men who understood they might be living their final minutes. The depth charge attacks continued relentlessly, each explosion closer than the last. For 45 minutes, the Japanese destroyers methodically worked over the area where the submarine had disappeared. Their sonar operators tracked every sound, every movement, every mechanical vibration that might reveal their quarry's position. Depth charges exploded in carefully planned patterns, creating killing zones of compressed water and shattered steel. The Nautilus absorbed punishment that would have destroyed smaller vessels, her heavy construction providing just enough protection to keep her crew alive. During this terrifying ordeal, Brockman made a decision that would change naval history. Even as his submarine was being hammered by enemy fire, he ordered his radio operator to transmit detailed position reports to Pacific Fleet headquarters. The information included precise coordinates of the Japanese carrier force, their course and speed, formation composition, and tactical deployment. These messages were encoded using the most secure cryptographic systems available, then broadcast on high-frequency radio bands that could reach American command centers hundreds of miles away. The radio transmissions were intercepted by the aircraft carriers Enterprise and Yorktown, both operating southeast of Midway under the tactical command of Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher. Fletcher's staff immediately recognized the intelligence value of Brockman's reports, which provided the first accurate positioning data for Admiral Nagumo's striking force. Previous American reconnaissance efforts had failed to locate the Japanese carriers with sufficient precision for coordinated air attacks. Now, thanks to the Nautilus, American dive bomber squadrons could plot intercept courses with mathematical accuracy. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, commanding Air Group 6 from the Enterprise, received updated target coordinates just as his Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers were reaching their maximum range. McCluskey had been searching for the Japanese fleet for over an hour, burning precious fuel while following outdated intelligence estimates. Brockman's position reports allowed him to adjust course by 30 degrees, putting his squadron directly on track for the enemy formation. The timing proved absolutely critical. McCluskey's planes had less than 30 minutes of fuel remaining when they spotted smoke on the horizon. Meanwhile, the USS Yorktown launched her own air group under similar circumstances. Lieutenant Commander Maxwell Leslie's bombing squadron received the same intelligence updates, allowing them to coordinate their approach with the Enterprise Air Group. The result was a perfectly timed converging attack that would catch the Japanese carriers at their most vulnerable moment. Without Brockman's position reports, both American air groups would likely have missed their targets entirely, returning to their carriers with full bomb loads and empty fuel tanks. The Japanese fleet had been caught in the middle of their own air operations when the Nautilus first attacked. Admiral Nagumo was preparing to launch a second strike against Midway Island, with aircraft spotted on deck and armed with high explosive bombs intended for land targets. The submarine's torpedo attack forced an immediate course change that disrupted flight operations and delayed the planned launch. More importantly, the presence of an American submarine suggested that enemy surface forces might be closer than Japanese intelligence had estimated. At 10:20 hours, the first American dive bombers appeared over the Japanese formation. McCluskey's squadron dove on the aircraft carrier Kaga with devastating precision, scoring multiple hits that transformed the ship into a floating inferno. Simultaneously, Leslie's planes struck the Akagi and Soryu, Admiral Nagumo's flagship, and another fleet carrier loaded with aviation fuel and munitions. The attacks lasted less than 6 minutes, but effectively destroyed Japanese naval aviation in the Pacific. From his position 30 feet underwater, Brockman heard the explosions as seismic shocks transmitted through the ocean itself. The massive detonations aboard the Japanese carriers generated pressure waves that traveled for miles through the water, rattling the Nautilus's hull with vibrations that felt like distant earthquakes. Sonar operators reported multiple large explosions followed by secondary blasts that suggested magazine fires and aviation fuel detonations. The crew understood they were witnessing something extraordinary, though they could not yet comprehend the full magnitude of what was occurring above them. The Japanese destroyer screen gradually abandoned their depth charge attacks as reports of the carrier strikes reached their commanders. Emergency rescue operations took priority over submarine hunting, forcing the destroyers to race toward their burning flagships in desperate attempts to save survivors. The Nautilus found herself alone in waters that had been swarming with enemy vessels just minutes earlier. The sudden silence almost as terrifying as the previous bombardment. Brockman cautiously raised his periscope to survey the scene above. The view that greeted him would remain burned into his memory for the rest of his life. 3 Japanese aircraft carriers burned from bow to stern, their flight decks twisted into unrecognizable wreckage by internal explosions. Smoke columns rose thousands of feet into the sky, visible from over 100 miles away. Destroyers circled the burning hulks like frantic insects, picking up survivors from water slicked with aviation fuel and debris. The most powerful naval striking force in the world was dying before his eyes. Admiral Nagumo's flagship, the Akagi, presented the most spectacular destruction. Multiple bomb hits had detonated aircraft fuel systems and munition storage areas, creating fires that burned with temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The steel flight deck buckled and warped under extreme heat, while secondary explosions continued to rock the ship's hull. Damage control efforts proved hopeless against fires fed by high-octane aviation gasoline and torpedo warheads. By noon, the carrier was listing heavily to port with her superstructure completely engulfed in flames. The Kaga suffered similar devastation. Direct hits amidships had penetrated her hangar deck, where fueled aircraft awaited launch. The resulting fireball consumed everything combustible within minutes, including aircraft, fuel lines, munitions magazines, and much of the crew. Compartments designed to contain battle damage became death traps as watertight doors warped shut under extreme heat. Survivors who reached the flight deck found themselves trapped on a platform of white-hot steel, surrounded by burning aviation fuel that had spread across the surrounding water. The Soryu, smallest of the 3 carriers, actually sank first, despite being less heavily damaged. Her compact design proved vulnerable to flooding when bomb hits ruptured multiple compartments simultaneously. The crew abandoned ship within hours of the attack, watching their vessel disappear beneath the waves with her aircraft still spotted on deck. The sight of a modern aircraft carrier sinking in broad daylight shocked even veteran Japanese sailors, who had witnessed the destruction at Pearl Harbor. Intelligence analysts later determined that Brockman's position reports had enabled the most decisive tactical surprise in naval history. Without accurate targeting information from the Nautilus, American air groups would have missed the Japanese fleet entirely, allowing Nagumo to complete his planned strikes against Midway Island. The subsequent invasion of the atoll would have proceeded on schedule, potentially forcing the United States to negotiate a Pacific settlement favorable to Japan. Instead, the loss of 4 fleet carriers in a single day crippled Japanese naval aviation permanently. The strategic implications extended far beyond the immediate tactical victory. Japan's carrier-based aviation program required years to train replacement pilots, and the industrial capacity to replace the lost ships simply did not exist. American shipyards, meanwhile, were already launching new Essex-class carriers that would dominate Pacific operations for the remainder of the war. The balance of naval power had shifted irrevocably in America's favor, and much of this transformation could be traced directly to intelligence provided by an obsolete submarine that many had written off as useless. Brockman's radio transmissions also demonstrated the critical importance of real-time intelligence in modern naval warfare. Previous battles had been fought with information that was hours or days old, leading to missed opportunities and tactical confusion. The Nautilus proved that submarines could function as forward observation posts, providing fleet commanders with precise enemy positions and movement patterns. This concept would revolutionize naval doctrine, establishing submarines as essential components of carrier task force operations. The engineering challenges overcome by the Nautilus crew during their ordeal highlighted American industrial and technical superiority in unexpected ways. Despite being built more than a decade earlier, the submarine's hull construction proved capable of withstanding punishment that would have destroyed vessels built to less demanding specifications. Her electrical systems continued functioning under battle damage that might have crippled newer ships designed with less redundancy. The crew's technical expertise allowed them to maintain communications equipment and navigation systems while under direct enemy attack. The human element proved equally important. Brockman's decision to continue transmitting intelligence while his ship was being depth-charged required exceptional courage and professional dedication. His crew supported these transmissions despite knowing that radio signals might help enemy destroyers track their position. The combination of technical competence and personal bravery exemplified the qualities that would carry American forces to victory throughout the Pacific War. Admiral Chester Nimitz personally commended the Nautilus in his official battle report, noting that the submarine's intelligence contributions had been instrumental in achieving tactical surprise. Fleet headquarters immediately revised submarine deployment doctrine to emphasize reconnaissance missions and real-time intelligence gathering. New communication procedures were established to ensure that submarine commanders could transmit critical information directly to carrier task force commanders without routing messages through intermediate command levels. The Battle of Midway marked a turning point not just in naval tactics, but in the fundamental nature of warfare itself. Information had proven as decisive as firepower, intelligence as important as courage. The integration of multiple platforms, submarines, aircraft carriers, and land-based reconnaissance demonstrated the emerging importance of coordinated operations across different domains. The Nautilus had participated in the birth of modern information-driven warfare, where success depended on the speed and accuracy of data transmission as much as the effectiveness of weapons systems. Japanese naval aviation never recovered from the losses sustained at Midway. The 4 aircraft carriers sunk during the battle had represented over half of Japan's total fleet carrier capacity, and their highly trained air groups could not be replaced within any reasonable time frame. Subsequent Japanese carrier operations were hampered by inexperienced pilots and reduced aircraft capacity, while American carrier forces grew exponentially in size and capability. The industrial war of attrition that followed favored the United States overwhelmingly, largely because Japan lacked the shipbuilding capacity to replace major vessels lost in battle. The torpedo failures experienced by the Nautilus also led to significant improvements in American submarine warfare capabilities. Post-battle analysis revealed fundamental design flaws in the Mark 14 torpedo that had plagued submarine operations throughout 1942. The Bureau of Ordnance finally acknowledged these problems and implemented corrective modifications that dramatically improved torpedo reliability. By 1943, American submarines were sinking Japanese merchant vessels and warships at unprecedented rates, contributing significantly to Japan's growing resource shortages. Brockman himself continued submarine operations throughout the war, eventually commanding newer and more capable vessels as they became available. His emphasis on intelligence gathering and tactical coordination established patterns that would be followed by submarine commanders throughout the Pacific theater. Many of his crew members received accelerated promotions and went on to command their own submarines, spreading the tactical innovations developed aboard the Nautilus throughout the submarine force. The story of the Nautilus at Midway also illustrated the unpredictable nature of technological warfare. Advanced weapon systems could fail catastrophically, while obsolete platforms might prove unexpectedly valuable in changed circumstances. The submarine's contribution to American victory came not from superior technology, but from innovative tactical employment and exceptional crew performance. This lesson would prove relevant throughout the war, as both sides struggled to adapt existing equipment to rapidly evolving operational requirements. Engineering teams analyzing the submarine's performance after Midway identified numerous areas for improvement in future designs. Better sonar systems, more reliable torpedoes, improved air conditioning, and enhanced communication equipment became standard features on newer submarines. However, they also recognized that the Nautilus's heavy construction and redundant systems had provided crucial survivability advantages during the depth charge attack. Subsequent submarine designs incorporated similar structural strength while adding modern technological improvements. The intelligence value of submarine operations extended beyond target identification to include detailed observations of enemy tactics, equipment, and operational patterns. Brockman's reporting throughout 1942 provided Pacific Fleet headquarters with comprehensive assessments of Japanese naval capabilities that proved invaluable for strategic planning. This information helped American commanders understand enemy strengths and weaknesses, enabling more effective tactical decisions in subsequent engagements. The psychological impact of the Midway defeat on Japanese naval personnel was profound and long-lasting. The loss of 4 fleet carriers in a single day shattered the aura of invincibility that had surrounded the Imperial Navy since Pearl Harbor. Japanese pilots and sailors who had previously approached combat with supreme confidence now faced American forces with growing apprehension. This psychological shift contributed to declining Japanese performance in later battles, as doubt replaced the certainty that had characterized early war operations. American industrial capacity played a crucial role in exploiting the victory at Midway. While Japan struggled to replace lost carriers and aircraft, American shipyards were completing new vessels at an accelerating pace. The Essex-class carrier program alone would eventually produce 24 fleet carriers, each more capable than any Japanese vessel. This industrial advantage, combined with improved tactical coordination demonstrated at Midway, created overwhelming American superiority in subsequent Pacific operations. The Nautilus continued patrol operations for another 3 years, participating in numerous combat missions throughout the Pacific theater. However, her crew always remembered June 4, 1942, as the day their obsolete submarine helped change the course of World War II. The intelligence they provided had enabled one of the most decisive naval victories in American history, proving that courage and competence could overcome technological limitations when applied with intelligence and determination. Years after the war, historians would identify the Battle of Midway as the moment when American victory in the Pacific became inevitable. The destruction of Japanese carrier aviation eliminated Japan's ability to project power across the vast Pacific Ocean, reducing their forces to defensive operations around increasingly isolated island bases. The strategic initiative passed permanently to American forces, who exploited their growing technological and industrial advantages with devastating effectiveness. The legacy of the Nautilus extended beyond her specific contributions to include broader lessons about the nature of modern warfare. Success required integration of multiple platforms and capabilities, effective intelligence gathering and distribution, and the ability to adapt existing equipment to changing tactical requirements. These principles would guide American military development throughout the Cold War and into the modern era, establishing patterns of technological innovation and tactical flexibility that remain relevant today. In retirement, William Brockman often reflected on the events of June 4, 1942, and the role his submarine had played in shaping history. He understood that the Nautilus had not won the Battle of Midway through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through being in the right place at the right time with a crew capable of performing their duties under extreme pressure. The submarine's contribution demonstrated that in warfare, as in life, success often depends more on character than on equipment, more on determination than on technological superiority. One of Brockman's crew members later summarized their experience with characteristic understatement. "We never sank a carrier, but maybe we sank their luck." This observation captured the essential truth about the Nautilus's role at Midway. The submarine had not destroyed Japanese ships directly, but had provided the intelligence that enabled other American forces to achieve devastating tactical surprise. In the complex calculus of modern warfare, information had proven as valuable as firepower, positioning as important as weaponry. The Battle of Midway transformed American perceptions of submarine warfare and established new doctrinal foundations for underwater operations. Submarines were no longer viewed merely as commerce raiders or auxiliary vessels, but as integral components of fleet operations capable of decisive contributions to major engagements. This recognition led to expanded submarine construction programs and improved integration with surface and aviation forces throughout the remainder of the war. The engineering lessons learned from the Nautilus's performance influenced submarine design for decades afterward. The importance of robust construction, redundant systems, and reliable communications equipment became fundamental requirements for underwater vessels. American submarine technology advanced rapidly during the war years, incorporating lessons learned from combat operations while maintaining the structural integrity that had allowed the Nautilus to survive her ordeal under enemy fire. The human story of the Nautilus crew exemplified the broader American experience during World War II. Ordinary men from small towns across the country had volunteered for dangerous duty aboard an aging submarine, then performed extraordinary feats under combat conditions that tested every aspect of their training and character. Their success reflected not just individual courage, but the industrial and educational systems that had prepared them for such challenges. The strategic implications of Midway continued to resonate throughout the Pacific War and beyond. Japan's inability to replace the carriers and pilots lost in the battle forced increasingly desperate tactical decisions that ultimately hastened their defeat. American forces, meanwhile, exploited their growing advantages with operations of unprecedented scale and complexity, demonstrating the decisive importance of industrial capacity in modern warfare. The intelligence revolution initiated at Midway would transform military operations throughout the modern era. Real-time information sharing between different platforms and command levels became standard practice, enabling coordination and tactical flexibility that previous generations of military leaders could hardly imagine. The Nautilus had participated in the birth of information age warfare, where success increasingly depended on data processing and communication as much as traditional combat capabilities. As the years passed and the veterans of Midway grew old, their story gained new relevance for each succeeding generation. The lesson that obsolete equipment could achieve decisive results through innovative employment and exceptional performance resonated with military professionals facing their own technological challenges. The example of the Nautilus demonstrated that victory often depends more on leadership, training, and determination than on having the most advanced weapons systems. The submarine that many had dismissed as useless before the battle had proven that in warfare, as in life, appearances could be deceiving, and that the difference between success and failure often lay in the character of the people involved, rather than the sophistication of their equipment. On June 4, 1942, an aging submarine with malfunctioning torpedoes had helped change the course of world history, proving that courage and competence could overcome any technological disadvantage when applied with intelligence and unwavering determination. Do you understand now how a single obsolete submarine changed the entire trajectory of the Pacific War? How intelligence and positioning proved more decisive than the newest weapons? The USS Nautilus reminds us that in the most critical moments of history, it is often not the most advanced technology that determines the outcome, but the courage of ordinary people doing extraordinary things under impossible circumstances. If this story of hidden heroism and strategic intelligence resonates with you, please subscribe to honor the memory of those who served with such dedication and share this video so that their sacrifice and ingenuity are never forgotten. These men sealed their fate beneath the waves so that freedom could triumph above them.